ROM hacking scenes for games I like are something I've always had a morbid fascination with, even if I admittedly haven't played many hacks myself. There's just something that's so interesting about recognizable properties being twisted in ways that the actual IP holder would never allow, for better or for worse. And when it comes to game franchises with the most interesting ROM hacking scenes, Fire Emblem is up there. Turns out that if a series' availability is so bad that it inevitably creates a lot of unpromoted berserkers, its ROM hacking scene is going to be pretty good. And while there are hacks for most games in the series, the GBA era has the most active hacking scene, with all 3 games on the system having their own advantages. FE7 has the advantage of being a good chunk of Western fans' introduction to the series, so it has its fair share of prolific hacks. Elysian Knights, Gas Bloodlines hacks, and the single most well-known FE hack, The Last Promise. FE8 has the advantage of being the easiest Fire Emblem game to hack due to the mountains of community resources created for it, so the overwhelming majority of FE hacks you see today come from it. And while FE6 doesn't have any of the advantages that those 2 games have, there's one major aspect of it that motivates a lot of people to create a specific type of hack. You see, due to stuff like hit rates, certain maps, and unit distribution, FE6 is one of the most polarizing games in a series where every game is polarizing on some level. So as a result, there's a bunch of hacks that attempt to rebalance FE6, with the most notable of which being 2020's Project Ember, which has become equally as polarizing as FE6. But there's another FE6 rebalance hack that is comparatively obscure, one with an interesting story behind it that I think deserves to be told. So allow me to take you on a strange journey as I introduce you to Roy's Bizarre Adventure. Our story begins on the Let's Play section of Something Awful forums with a user named Vilcasis or Vilcalizer on other sites. Vilcasis was a fan of various JRPGs like Suikoden, Phantasy Star, The Shining series, and of course, Fire Emblem. In May of 2015, they realized that despite how active they were in the Fire Emblem community, they never actually played FE6 and decided to rectify that by doing a Let's Play thread on it. But this wasn't just an ordinary Let's Play. You see, Vilcasis had some experience with both sprite editing and ROM hacking prior to this thread. In fact, among other things, they would later go on to create the iconic animations of Hector planting his axe into the ground and punching his opponent instead, and then using a gun, which you may have seen before. With these abilities at their disposal, they would hack FE6 as they see fit and make various aesthetic and mechanical changes. Wolt would become Kenshiro upon promotion, complete with a new critical animation. Roy would grow a beard that kept getting larger and larger over the course of the LP. Milady would keep switching her name and appearance solely because Vilcasis thought her original name was stupid. And in the game's penultimate chapter, Marcus would use a Night Crest to ascend to his Super Jigen form and take on dragons even without a legendary weapon. However, my favorite moment from the LP has nothing to do with any of these edits. You see, in chapter 15, Vilcasis did not deploy Elfin, and as such, they had to kill Percival. Many people in the replies were mad about this, causing Vilcasis to go back and recruit Percival, only for them to go back to the save file where Percival died because they got more experience in that one. And one of the aforementioned people in the replies was so mad that they took to MS Paint and created World War I style propaganda against Vilcasis. Overall, Vilcasis' FE6 LP is a really entertaining thread, albeit with some things that haven't aged well, most notably a couple of ableist slurs. Of course, this was normal for the culture of the internet in 2015, but that doesn't make it right. I still feel it's important to warn people who are sensitive to those words, just in case they wanted to read the thread for themselves. Anyways, the LP was well loved by Something Awful users to the point where it would be immortalized in the LP archive. And after completing the final chapter of the game, Vilcasis would give users a pass that converts FE6 into the version from the LP, albeit with some notable omissions like Super Jigen and the Hector stand animation. While Vilcasis didn't give this version of FE6 a name, it would be known in some FE circles as Roy's Bizarre Adventure, which is weird because all of the JoJo references in the thread were actually omitted in the finished game. I recently played this hack myself because I thought the premise was funny and the story behind it was interesting. So, what do I think? Well, starting with the story, it's the exact same as Vanilla Binding Blade, only with some portraits changed. So you can either skip it or watch it solely to see the new tone that scenes take with the most ridiculous portraits possible. And speaking of which, a big part of the game's appeal is seeing how stupid and over the top the new portraits for units are. Dorothy, Wizard of Oz. Wrecker, Wrecker Hauer. Noah and Hugh, characters of the same name from Phantasy Star 2. Barf, a Lego figure. Fur, a fir tree. And my favorite of the playable cast, Geese, 2 geese. I should also point out that some of the edits to bosses are gems as well. A boss named Dory is a fish. You'd think it would be a reference to Finding Nemo, but no, it's not even the character from that movie or the species she's based on. It's a completely different fish, and honestly, it's funnier that way. In a cool Sacred Stones reference, one of the bandit twins in chapter 14 was replaced by a demon of pure evil. And finally, there's a Chapter 6 boss, Wagner, who's now a Tintin character with the same name. His description says he's a pianist that fell in with the wrong crowd, although it's still a better crowd than that other musician named Wagner. However, something I was surprised to find out about this hack was how it actually has some interesting gameplay changes. I should note that for the most part, it plays like vanilla FE6. If Project Ember is FE6 for people who hate FE6, not that there's anything wrong with that, Roy's Bizarre Adventure is FE6 for people who like FE6 and want something slightly different. Now, I totally understand the appeal of Project Ember, where it's a team of multiple people spending years making the most precisely balanced hack, but there's just something really fun about a hack made in the span of less than 3 months where all the changes are off the fly and based on the very deep question of, is it funny? As far as mechanical changes are concerned, there's 5 main ones. The first 2 are buffing Armor Knights by giving them 5 movement and adding more durability to the legendary weapons. These are pretty basic changes, and Project Ember would go on to incorporate both of them, although in the case of the latter, it's to a lesser extent. But the other 3 changes are where things get interesting. Let's talk about RBA's numerous changes to certain units. First, there's the aforementioned Wolf's Hero, who FE6's was inspired to create due to a discussion they saw about whether good stats would be enough to make archers good. Now, while Project Ember buffed Wold, he's still subject to a low defense gross and the inflated stats of PE enemies. Roy's Bizarre Adventure, on the other hand, just gave him Hector's FE7 stats, except any that were lower than what he already had. By combining the strengths of 2 drastically different units, you've effectively eliminated both of their weaknesses. Wolf's Hero has the strength and defense of an armor unit without the risk of taking bonus damage, missing, or getting double. And because of his defense stat in particular, he can effectively turn the main weakness of archers, being susceptible to attacks on enemy phase, into a strength. You see, the AI in Fire Emblem loves to attack units who can't fight back, so if you place Wold near a one-rage enemy, you don't want to attack some of your other units who can evade them out with minimal risk. But that's enough about making a bad unit good. Let's talk about how RBA somehow managed to make one of the weakest units in the series even worse. Unpopular opinion and scorching hot take, Wendy might not have the best performance. She starts out with stats that are still embarrassing by the standards of a level 1 knight, and the signature FE6 growth rates aren't exactly helping matters for her. However, when editing the 3 units who joined in the middle of Chapter 8, FE6's somehow accidentally caused Wendy to become a general with the same stats, and even warns people about this in the final post containing the RBA patch. So when Wendy's garbage stats are given to a promoted unit, she ascends quite possibly the weakest unit in all of Fire Emblem. And before I get to my absolute favorite unit from the game, let's have a lightning round of other changes I still find interesting but don't have as much to say about. White J is a speedy speed boy with a 145% growth in that stat. Geralt was demoted to a level 10 cavalier that has the same stats. Sophia was buffed in an attempt to make Arcadia better. Keyword there is attempt. Hugh somehow managed to cap his magic in just 1 level, and I still don't know how that happened. Marcus's growths were buffed to such an extent that he could reasonably cap every single one of his stats by level 20. Finally, let's talk about my favorite unit in RBA, Noah. In vanilla FE6, Noah is a mid-cavalier who you will most likely forget about because you have the least reason to use him out of any cav in the game. But in RBA, Noah was changed to be a shaman to be closer to the character he's based off of and to make things more interesting. In a similar manner to Wolf's Hero, Noah has really good unit feel because of how peculiar of a unit he is. Noah has the same stats as his cav counterpart, except his magic and res growths were buffed to a ridiculous degree by FE6 standards, and he obviously doesn't have the same movement. As a result, he keeps the average magic user's strength of being able to nuke enemies which predominantly have low res without the average magic user's weakness of dying whenever something physical lightly taps them. He also joins at a part of the game where you don't have as many options for magic units, as he's your only shaman until Chapter 12 and your second tome user in general. And finally, he has a unique niche of being able to use all 3 tome types, which is something that no other FE6 unit can do. For the second to last change, the max level that classes can reach has been changed to 30. In the LP, FE6's has agreed to only go above 20 for units like Roy and Chad who are screwed by reaching the level cap. In the case of Roy specifically, I think this is a more interesting solution to his faults as a unit in comparison to most FE6 rebalances. Roy's character arc in The Binding Blade is about feeling insecure in the role he was unexpectedly thrust into. Having gameplay faults up until the point where he obtains the thing the game is named after is supposed to tie into that. Most FE6 hacks will just buff him from the start, which goes against what the game is trying to do. On the other hand, RBA's solution of simply allowing him to get more levels but still keeping his stats hits the perfect middle ground of alleviating gameplay frustrations while still preserving the gameplay integration of his character arc. Of course, if you're playing the hack yourself, there's nothing stopping you from using it to make your already strong units even stronger. However, in Fire Emblem, it's usually optimal to promote your units as soon as you can, so there's little reason to go all the way up to 30. Gee, if only RBA had some sort of incentive to
these nuts. Got him!
The last change I want to talk about is how Zephiel was made into the most overtuned boss fight in all of Fire Emblem. You see, Vilcus beats Chapter 22 with Roy as the only unit deployed, which isn't exactly the climactic showdown with the main villain you'd expect. But because of the special Roy's Bizarre Adventure attack, Armad's broke, meaning Vilcus would have to play the chapter again to get the true ending. So on their second stab at it, they decided to make Zephiel more interesting. 39 attack, 42 defense, 39 resistance. The end result is a boss that hits ridiculously hard, has a significant chance of critting you, and can only be damaged by near-capped units with legendary weapons. And this is just on normal mode. Now, as far as what you're doing during the fight when you're prepared for it, RBA Zephiel is nothing special. The only thing separating him from all the bosses beforehand is that he has really big numbers and the other bosses don't. I genuinely beat him on my first try and can say that his status as the hardest fight in Fire Emblem says more about the series' boss design pre-engaged than it does about his fight specifically. But what makes this fight so interesting is the effect that it has on the long-term planning you do in RBA. Capping stats is something you'll rarely have to do in Fire Emblem, yet in RBA it feels like a necessity. As a result, you're going to strategize in a completely different way from any other Fire Emblem game, in the hopes that some of your units can do even a single point of damage to Zephiel. You're going to think hard about who gets every kill. You're going to think harder about when to promote your units. And you're going to mess around with units and mechanics that you wouldn't have used otherwise. For example, in my original playthrough of FE6, I chose to let Hugh die to save money. But in RBA, I went out of my way to use advanced movement strats to get Roy to the side of the map Hugh was on and recruit him so I could get the member card and use the Chapter 21 secret staff to cap out my unit strength. He was even one of the healers in the Zephiel fight and sacrificed himself so that my other units may live. And if you play RBA, chances are that you're going to have a similar story with another unit. I don't know why you're expecting a deep conclusion. I just think turning a shitty early game archer into Kenshiro is funny.